fantasy world? We're back. Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy's Finest podcast. I'm your host, William Spencer. No Jalen McQueen this week. He couldn't make the recording this week, but he'll be back, so no worries there. Let's just give him a shout out on Twitter. You can do that by following him on @ace_gametime215. Let him know that you missed him for this episode. You want to hear his voice, you know. We got a lot to cover. There has been a ton of news the last couple of weeks while we were away, so we're going to try and cover most of it in this episode. We're not going to get too lengthy in our news segment, but man, it's been so much going on, and it could have a lot of implications to your fantasy season this year. It's like, where to start? But before we get into that, and we're going to get into the main course of our episode. I said main course like this is food. So you can tell when you got a big man on the mic, he always thinking about food. But we're going to cover our early wide receiver rankings, 11 through 20. We covered 1 through 10 in episode 4, which is doing surprisingly well. The last couple of days, we actually got up to 400 listens, plays on Anchor. Yeah, that's got to be commended. We really appreciate all the guys that are listening to our podcast. It's just amazing to be able to hear our voices giving our own podcast takes and things like that, and people are actually listening, and it means a lot. So I just want to say thank you to all those who are listening. Please continue to listen, share, subscribe. We're on a bunch of different platforms, from Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. We are recently got activated on Stitcher and TuneIn. There's a bunch of others, so we'll make sure to list those so you can hear us on whatever podcast entity you're using. So, without further ado, let's get into the news, because like I said, it's been so much going on the last couple of days recently because of camp starting and things like that. So let's jump into it. All right. Now, before we get to the news, I did forget to do one thing before we switch to our news segment. Make sure you follow us on Twitter @Fantasy's Finest. You can also follow me on Twitter as well at @IamHyperion_FPH. You can follow us on Facebook and join our community. We have a Fantasy Finest page and group. We really would appreciate it if you did that. You can also follow us on Instagram @Fantasy's Finest for the latest news, memes and updates and stuff like that on our Instagram page. But let's go to our news segment. Like I said, we had a lot to cover because of training camp getting underway. We have a lot of players who are not showing up to camp because they want new contracts. The one that started us off was Melvin Gordon. He had told the Chargers brass through his agent that he will not be showing up to training camp, and if they do not give him a new deal, he will request a trade from the team. His agent, Fletcher Smith, reported this to Adam Schefter, who tweeted it out, I believe, a couple days ago. Now, Melvin Gordon is set to make $5.6 million in the final year of his 4-year, $10 million rookie contract. He will be an unrestricted free agent in 2020. He's recently said that he will hold out. His holdout could extend into the regular season. So what that means is that basically he's like, yo, I want to get paid. You know, he's on the final year of his deal. He wants more money, or he wants a new contract. So Melvin Gordon, there's been a lot of varying opinions on whether he's worth the money. I think he is worth the money. He's not a running back that's going to get you 1,000 yards all the time. I believe he's only had 1,000-yard season so far in his career, but he's a running back who's very versatile, who's deadly in the passing game out for the Chargers. He had 10 touchdowns last season. He can do multiple things that makes him a threat. He's over 1,000 yards from scrimmage, I believe almost every year. So he's a running back who can. He's deadly on the ground. He's deadly through the air. He's a guy. I would say in most circles he's got to be at least a top 10 running back, maybe top 7 overall. There's a lot of talent out there, but Melvin Gordon is among one of the best running backs in the league. Now, whether or not the Chargers will actually pay him is a whole nother discussion, because right now the Chargers are dug in, and they aren't giving him a new deal right now. I don't believe that there are any contract negotiations going on as well. So they're about to play the waiting game. They're going to see who budgets first. If Melvin Gordon doesn't show up, you're looking at Austin Eckler and Justin Jackson to take over the reps during training camp while Melvin Gordon's not there. So we'll see who blinks first. Someone else who's kind of following suit and holding out is Ezekiel Elliott. Now, earlier during the season, this is a little bit older, but I wanted to cover this as well. He's not going to be suspended because of the incident that happened in Las Vegas. We all know what's going on with that, about him being sued by the security guard, which is kind of a lame move because I believe he waited about 50 plus days to decide whether he was going to come after Ezekiel Elliott, because he felt like, the league didn't punish him for him knocking him over the guardrail. Like, come on, dude. If it was anybody else, this would be a non-issue. You're doing security at a music festival, like, and you're like 180 pounds, if that, soaking wet. He probably not even that much. He's a young guy, but you getting bumped in a security in a music festival, like, let's be real. If it was anybody else, this would not be a issue. But because it's Ezekiel Elliott, because he's famous and he has money, he's a target. Now, I'm not going to say what Ezekiel Elliott did was the smartest thing, being out that late and, bringing attention to himself by him and his girlfriend or assumed girlfriend out there arguing. But, come on. Like, if you know how big he is and you know that he's Ezekiel Elliott and he's a running back for the Dallas Cowboys, the last thing you're going to do is try and egg him on if he's upset. And if you look at the TMZ video, that's what it looked like he did, because Zeke wasn't even looking at him, and then he turned around when the guy said something to him, and then Zeke went back to him. So, that's neither here nor there. But back to the main topic of the fact that he's holding out. It seems like he's going to be holding out for a new contract. He was supposed to meet with the team Thursday to head out to Oxnard, California for a training camp, and he missed the flight. So he had until now. I'm recording this Saturday morning, early Saturday morning. It's like 1:47 a.m. At the time of this recording, Ezekiel Elliott has not shown up to training camp. He could have reported to training camp Friday and showed up on his own. Like other players for the Dallas Cowboys have already shown up on their own. I believe DeMarcus Lawrence was reported as showing up. He was actually there before the team showed up from the charter flight to Oxnard. So right now, the Cowboys have the option to fine him if he doesn't show up to camp. But that's their option to do so. Most recent reports saying they are trying to work out something with Ezekiel Elliott. Patrick Walker he's one of the football Dallas Cowboy analysts that I follow on Twitter. He recently said that they're exchanging words as far as the contract, and Dallas has sent out an offer, and a counter offer is being sent to Ezekiel Elliott, or could be sent to Ezekiel Elliott soon. So Dallas is trying to get him in camp. They're trying to make him happy, and they the Cowboys need Ezekiel Elliott just as much as he needs them. Jerry Jones has stuck out his neck to keep Ezekiel Elliott with the team. We all know what happened in 2017 during the whole suspension thing, and Jerry Jones going after Roger Goodell, or him beefing with Roger Goodell over the suspension. He's stuck by him during the whole court scenario. So they want Ezekiel Elliott needs to be with the Dallas Cowboys. He helps the offense go, and he's a big part of what they need if they hoping to get to a Super Bowl anytime soon. Another piece of information on Ezekiel Elliott is that if he doesn't show up to camp and he does intend to hold out, he has until August 6th to show up to camp so that he can get the accrued year for his for the remaining 2 years on his deal. If he does not show up by August 6th, he'll lose that accrued year and have to play an additional year on his rookie deal. While it may not seem like he's in a position to hold out and get what he wants, well, right now they're certainly trying to get everything done so that he can avoid a worse scenario. Moving on, Michael Thomas is another NFL player who's holding out in the hopes of a new deal. Michael Thomas has said that he's not reporting to camp until he gets a new deal. He's on the final year of his contract. I don't have his numbers for his contract or what he's going to be making, but it's more than obvious that the New Orleans Saints are going to try and get something done for him. Michael Thomas is one of the biggest names in football and fantasy football. He's a PPR machine, and what he does for the Saints, he's Drew Brees' number one target. If he's not there, who's Drew Brees throwing to? You have Traquan Smith. You may have Cameron Meredith coming back from injury. Ted Ginn. He has options, but none of those options are as big as what Michael Thomas brings to the table. So look for the Saints to try and get something done. Rumors are on a contract that he wants to have. He's looking to be the highest paid wide receiver in the NFL. He's looking to get, or he's rumored to want to have, a $20 million a year deal. Wow. I don't think that's ever been done before. So, of course, that hasn't been done before. Nobody said $20 million. So, we'll see where Michael Thomas and the Saints end up at. We'll see how that story ends. Cam Newton is expected to be a full go for training camp. He recently had shoulder surgery, tongue-tied, this offseason, but he was cleared to throw during OTAs, and he will have no limitations during training camp, which is a good sign. If you check the Fantasy's Finest Twitter page, we had a video of Cam Newton throwing a deep ball to Curtis Samuel, and he hit Curtis Samuel in stride for a touchdown pass. So maybe Cam Newton's over his shoulder issues, and he keeps it up and he can stay healthy. He should be an asset for your fantasy team if you're targeting him. All right, that'll do it for our news segment. Now we're going to get into our early wide receiver rankings, 11 through 20. All right, now it's time to get into the nitty gritty. We're going to finish up our early wide receiver rankings for the 2019 season. We're doing 11 through 20. As I mentioned before in the outset of the podcast, we already did 1 through 10. Because Ace isn't here, I'll have his list for 11 through 20 posted on Twitter, like we did when we finished 1 through 10. So, for my rankings for 11 through 20, I have to start at number 11. I have Stephon Diggs. Now, I like Stephon Diggs. I haven't been in a position to draft him for fantasy. He just eludes me. He normally gets picked either before me. He gets picked normally before I can get a chance to grab him. He was able to finish 12th last year in standard scoring, 10th in PPR. He ranked 7th in targets with 148, and he finished with 102 receptions, which ranks 8th amongst wide receivers. He's a bad man. I do like the fact that they did throw the ball a lot under John DeFilippo before he was canned, and now he's in Jacksonville. I am kind of concerned about how much they'll be throwing the ball. They really want to get Dalvin Cook going. We know Dalvin Cook has suffered a lot of injuries. He hasn't played a lot of games because of that, but they still insist on wanting to run the ball. And when the new offensive coordinator for the Vikings took over later on in the season, you could tell that they weren't looking to throw the ball as much. And the wide receivers as a whole, their targets dropped over the final 4 or 5 games. I remember looking up the numbers before. I'm going to try and pull them up now. But it was the drop-off was noticeable enough where they were averaging almost double-digit targets for the first half of the season. And then when John DeFilippo got fired, the change was almost instant. Stefon Diggs, in particular, out of both him and Adam Thielen, were able to produce, but it wasn't to the liking where it was in the beginning of the season. They were getting 10 targets, 12 targets, 15 targets, 11 targets, all in the beginning of the season, and then that production just dropped off once John DeFilippo and the Vikings made that offensive coordinator change. He still managed to finish. He still finished 8th in touchdowns with 9. I think that they're still going to use. Of course, they're still going to use the wide receivers. It's just a matter of if their targets are going to be the same. But even if they're not, Stefon Diggs is still a big time playmaker. He's still going to get the ball because Kirk Cousins has to throw to somebody, and he's just one of those. He's one of those young, dynamic wide receivers that is grabbing a lot of attention, not only in reality football but in fantasy as well. I like Stefon Diggs. If I have a chance to draft him this year, he's definitely on my radar. I definitely want to get him on the team. You can grab him as a lower end, or I guess you would say a lower end or a mid-range wide receiver 1. Like I said, it depends on how they're going to use him this season. And I have his numbers from weeks 11 through 15. You can tell that there's a stark difference in his targets once the change was made. He only reached double-digit targets in week 15. Like from weeks 11 through 14, his targets were 6, 6, 7, 6, and then 10. If you look at the beginning of this season, it was week 2, 13, week 3, 10, week 4, 15, week 5, 11. And then you hit a little bump in week 6 when he got 4 targets. And then week 7, 15, week 8, 11, week 9, 18, week 10, 11. So he was getting he was getting double-digit targets for the large majority of the first half of the season, and then that change happened. But they're still looking to throw him the ball. Have a little more hope that they'll keep throwing the ball to him, which will still make him a big fantasy commodity. So we're going to move on. At number 12, I have T.Y. Hilton. He finished 15th last year in standard scoring, 14th in PPR. He ranked 15th in targets with 120. He had 76 receptions, was ranked for 16th. T.Y. Hilton, a lot of people are saying that he could have a down year because they're bringing in so many weapons. You have Jack Doyle and Eric Ebron at the tight end spots. They drafted Paris Campbell, who was gaining a lot of attention during the OTAs. They signed Devin Funchess. But I think this is a good thing for T.Y. Hilton. The Colts are a pass-heavy offense, but for the large majority of T.Y.'s career, he's really only been the only viable wide receiver. I mean, you had Dante Moncrief when he was there. He was more of a red zone guy. He scored a lot. He scored more touchdowns than T.Y. Hilton did. But outside of that, who's been the solid number 2? Who's been the other guy that could garner attention away from T.Y. Hilton? Or, the opposing defenses had to stop or game plan for outside of T.Y. Hilton. And off the top of my head, I can't really think of anybody. I mean, if you can think of anybody, let me know. And it depends on how far we go back. But this could actually be a benefit to T.Y. Hilton because now you have Devin Funchess, you have Paris Campbell, you have Nyheim Hines out the backfield, Marlon Mack. I was about to say Malcolm Butler. I'm like, nah, he don't play offense. But Marlon Mack, he can catch out the backfield too, but they lean more towards Nyheim Hines to do that. They have options in the passing game now, so you can't just key in on T.Y. Hilton and say, oh, we're going to stop him. Because now you have Andrew Luck has a lot more options. And I think that means for T.Y. Hilton that he can get targeted a little more freely. And hopefully we just need him to be targeted more in the end zone. He ranked 23rd among wide receivers last year with only 6 touchdowns. He's the wide receiver I would target more in PPR scoring formats than standard. The touchdowns is a thing that he just doesn't score a lot. Maybe it's because of his size, or maybe it's because of the fact that the tight ends and the running back probably eat more in the red zone than T.Y. Hilton does. He only accounts for about 20% of the targets inside the red zone, but the percentage goes down to 13.2 when you get to the end zone. So if he can get targeted more in the end zone, going towards when the wide receiver crosses the goal line, maybe he could score a few more touchdowns. But he's still a good wide receiver. You could still count him as a wide receiver 1 if you're, depending on your strategy, if you're looking to grab running backs, because the depth for running backs is a little lower than wide receiver. But I like T.Y. Hilton this year. Now going to 13, I have Keenan Allen from the Los Angeles Chargers. I think he's moving past his injury woes, which used to scare a lot of people off. He's heavily targeted. The Chargers are another offense that like to throw the ball. He finished 11th in targets with 137, and he ranked 9th in receptions with 97. He almost had 1,200 yards, 1,196, and that ranked 13th among wide receivers. He finished 14th overall in standard, 12th in PPR. He only had 6 touchdowns. So he tied with T.Y. Hilton in that regard. He's another one that he doesn't score a lot of touchdowns, which is mind-boggling because of how good he is everywhere else on the field. I think he faces a similar situation with T.Y. Hilton. They both are in pass-heavy offenses, but they both have a lot of weapons that can be used in the red zone. Hunter Henry, Mike Williams, Melvin Gordon, Austin Eckler. So they have options as well. I don't think their options are as deep as the Indianapolis Colts, but the Chargers are still going to spread the ball around when they get inside the end zone. Hopefully, they can target or put Keenan Allen in better position to score some more fantasy points. Keenan Allen accounts for about 18% of the targets inside the end zone. And that amounts to that broke down to about 7 targets over the year. So that number should go up now that there's no more Antonio Gates and there's no more Terrell Williams, because both have moved on. Williams is in Oakland and Antonio Gates is riding off into the sunset. For my 14th ranked wide receiver, Adam Thielen. I like Adam Thielen. He's a very good. Well, and very good is probably putting it mildly. He's a superb route runner. Just getting to watch some Vikings games last season, and catching some highlights, man. He shakes DBs out their shoes. The one thing that like I was concerned about with Stephon Diggs, but even more so with Adam Thielen, is that coaching change that occurred last season. And I think that hurt Adam Thielen a little bit more than it did Stephon Diggs. Now, despite that, Adam Thielen finished last year ranked the 7th wide receiver in fantasy and PPR and standard formats. He had 155 targets and 113 receptions, and he had 1,373 yards that ranked 8th. He was getting targeted out the like crazy in the beginning of the season, but then that drop off over the final 5 weeks is what scares me, because they really want to get back to running the ball. They take away opportunities from stellar players like Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs, and they funnel it into running the ball a bit more. I'll try and get a breakdown for what the percentage was over those weeks, but you see the shift from the same time frame from weeks 11 to 16. Adam Thielen had 9 targets, 10 targets in week 12. Then it drops down to 7 in week 13. Week 14 it was 2. Week 15 it was 6, and week 16 was 4. So it was like, what is going on? You still have one of the best wide receiver tandems in the league, and the targets drop off quite substantially, especially over the final 4 weeks, when you're hitting, the fantasy playoffs and, hopefully making a bid for a championship. Your wide receiver, maybe Thielen was a wide receiver 1 on some teams. Week 16, he's only getting you 4 targets for 38 yards. That's not good. Now, he did have a 75% catch rate in that game, but only 38 yards, no touchdowns. He scored no touchdowns over the final 4 weeks of the season. That would scare me too. Now, you coming into the season, hopefully they don't go as run heavy as they did last year towards the end, where it affected Thielen and Diggs' targets like that. But that was a red flag for me. I was, Adam Thielen did damage during the regular season. In the beginning, you want that kind of production to carry over for your fantasy team. So hopefully they work all that out. But I have him ranked 14th. I think he's safe there. He's still going to be one of the primary focuses in the wide receiver game, but hopefully they get those targets together and they go back up towards the regular season. Now, coming in at number 15, I have Robert Woods from the Los Angeles Rams. I really liked Robert Woods. Not like that's in past tense. I actually still like him now. His production could probably get a bump up with the news of Todd Gurley maybe losing some production. I'm still kind of skeptical on that, but Robert Woods is still one of the more targeted wide receivers in that offense. He finished 13th, ranked 13th in targets with 131. He had 86 receptions, which was 11th among wide receivers. He finished as a top 10 fantasy wide receiver in standard and 11th in PPR. He had 1,129 yards, which ranked 11th. The Rams are one of the more prolific passing units in the league. If you can grab Robert Woods later on in your draft, you should not feel any type of way about having him on your team. When I look at the Rams wide receivers, for me, it's Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, then Brandon Cooks. Now, I know a lot of people like Brandon Cooks because he's a deep threat, but when you have Robert Woods can streak down the field, he's not going to be I wouldn't say he's in the same league in terms of speed with Brandon Cooks, but Robert Woods is a bigger wide receiver. You can use him a little bit more in the red zone. in comparison to the other two. I think when they get closer to the end zone, Cooper Kupp becomes the man because of how quickly he can react and get open in short spaces. I have him ranked a little bit lower on my list, but he's still up there. I don't have Brandon Cooks in my top 20. Like, it's not to say that he's not a good wide receiver, but in terms of fantasy value for me, Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp are the two wide receivers that I would target first over Brandon Cooks. He had 7 touchdowns last season, was ranked 13th. I think Robert Woods is the best all-around wide receiver for the Rams. He can do damage in so many different ways in so many areas of the football field as opposed to Brandon Cooks. I think that's why I have him ranked that way. So if you can nail Robert Woods somewhere in I believe he's going somewhere in the 4th round, 4th or maybe mid-3rd, early 4th round, I would be fine having him there. If I go running back heavy in the first 2 rounds and then I'm looking for a wide receiver in the 3rd or 4th round, Robert Woods would be the guy that I would want to target. The Rams are going to pass the ball a ton. You got Jared Goff that's back there, and he's not bad passing the ball. You saw what he did last year. Robert Woods would be one of the wide receivers that I wouldn't be concerned with if I missed out on, the bigger name guys like DeAndre Hopkins and Devontae Adams and, Julio Jones and Mike Evans. If all those guys are gone and I'm looking at the next tier or maybe the tier after, I'm fine with picking Robert Woods. All right, moving on. Coming in at number 16, Calvin Ridley for the Atlanta Falcons. I'm about to say Atlantic. He finished 18th in fantasy, 22nd in PPR. He finished in 38. He ranked 38th in targets with 92. I expect the number to go up this year, as well as his receptions. He was a rookie last year. He dominated. He dominated in the end zone with 10 touchdowns, ranked 6th among wide receivers, and he almost had 1,000 yards. He had 121, which ranked 28th. But I think the targets, his receptions, and his yards should go up this year. Dirk Cutter is back with the Atlanta Falcons after his time with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The reason Chris Godwin is getting so much hype this year, because the reason Chris Godwin is getting so much hype this year, heading into this fantasy season, was because of how he was targeted last year, all over the field and in the red zone. I think that Dirk Cutter will bring that same type of style to the Atlanta Falcons, and he'll use Calvin Ridley similar to how Chris Godwin was used in his final year for the Bucs. If he can get, he's already, in my opinion, he's already better than Mohamed Sanu. There's no real contest there. He's already number 2 wide receiver for the Falcons. Tevin Coleman is gone. They're saying that they want to use not a committee, but they're going to shuffle. They're going to split time between Ito Smith and their other running back, Oliver. Or I got to get his name. But Devontae Freeman is going to be the main guy getting targets out of the backfield. But if the Atlanta Falcons are going to be passing more, I would expect Calvin Ridley to get a bump in those areas, and he's going to be a nice pick for your fantasy team. Matt Ryan trusts him around the red zone, which is good for me. If you have that kind of relationship with Matt Ryan, and they don't seem to want to throw the ball, prior to Cutter getting there, it didn't really seem like they wanted to throw Julio the ball or use him in the red zone, which is a bit odd, but that might change the season too under Cutter as the offensive coordinator. But if you can get Calvin Ridley, I would recommend him as well. Coming in at number 17, is Cooper Kupp. I have him ranked 17th because of the fact that he's coming back from a ACL injury. That injury might ward off some people that may have been high on Kupp last season and maybe a bit jaded because he tore his ACL. But he played in 8 games before going down in fantasy last year, and his numbers were over those 8 games. He finished with 556 yards and 6 touchdowns. Over 8 games. That's halfway through the season. If he continued that level of production, he could have hit double-digit touchdowns and over 1,000 yards as a slot receiver. That's gold. Now, there haven't been any setbacks as far as Kupp's recovery as he worked back from the ACL injury, which is good. They're likely going to take it easy on him during training camp so that he doesn't have any relapses or injury relapses and things of that nature, which is good. If you have an opportunity to grab Kupp, don't be scared of him being hurt or him being worked back slowly. It is the beginning of training camp. They're not going to run him through drills unless he's ready. They're not going to, make his workload hard during training camp. I think he'll be good for week 1. I haven't seen any reports that would suggest otherwise. Kupp is Jared Goff's safety blanket. They don't really use tight ends there. And the wide receivers seem to have a pretty balanced role in the offense. And Kupp is the guy who turns short yardage catches into longer yardage gains, and he's used well around the red zone. Kupp, if people in your league are leery on Kupp, take advantage of that. Go ahead and grab him. Coming in at number 18, I'm about to jump ahead to 19. Coming in at 18 is Chris Godwin. He's getting a lot of hype this year, as mentioned before. Bruce Arians is the new head coach over there, and he's really been gushing over Chris Godwin. He's been saying things like, "Oh, he's not coming off the field. They're going to use him a ton." I kind of believe it because Adam Humphries, the slot wide receiver that was there last year, he's gone. He's in Tennessee. Deshaun Jackson also left. He's in Philadelphia with the Eagles. O.J. Howard is looking like the third pass-catching option. Brashad Perriman is trying to salvage his NFL career with the Bucs. He's going to be their slot wide receiver, I believe. So when you look at their starting unit, you have Mike Evans, you have O.J. Howard, you have Chris Godwin, and you have Brashad Perriman. When Arians says that he's not coming off the field, I kind of believe him, because who else is there? All those targets between Humphries and Deshaun Jackson are gone. So that's a bump right there. As far as the targets that he had last year, he had 95 targets and 59 receptions. He finished with 842 yards and 7 touchdowns. With that many targets left over between Humphries and Deshaun Jackson, Chris Godwin could very well stay on the field for a large majority of the time and be a threat. Well, he had 67.7% of the snap shares for the team last year. So he was likely splitting time out with Deshaun Jackson in those wide receiver 2 sets. Because, Deshaun Jackson is a respectable deep threat. It makes sense. But with Jackson and Humphries gone, Chris Godwin's going to soak up some of those targets. Mike Evans' target share probably won't change too drastically because he's already a heavily targeted wide receiver. So if his share doesn't change, you have to look to Chris Godwin and O.J. Howard to soak up those targets. Because you tell me, I don't think anybody out of the backfield between Peyton Barber and Ronald Jones are really looking like, stalwarts out of the in the passing game out of the backfield. And I have a really, I did. Is anyone buying Andre Ellington? Just not to get off topic too quick, but anybody thinking he's gonna be the guy in Tampa? Anybody buying that? Because I have that feeling in the back of my head. It's like he's there for a reason, and the pickup was such. It was so under the radar. Like when I read it, I'm like, oh well, when did this happen? Like Arians, as soon as he got there, like maybe a week or two later, he scooped up Andre Ellington, and it was like low key. Like I didn't get any alerts on, Bleacher Report or any of those outlets like that. And so when I found out about it, I'm like, oh, okay, when did this happen? But they've been talking about how dragged the running back core is, with Peyton Barber being the plotter and Ronald Jones being an unknown. I don't want to say this, but just keep an eye on Andre Ellington. I have a very sneaky feeling that his name is going to pop up later on in the season or in training camp if Ronald Jones in particular doesn't show out, because they've been saying Peyton Barber is the lead back, but he sucks. I mean, what did he do last year that made you like, oh yeah, I definitely gotta get me some of those Peyton Barber shares? He's no, I'm not buying Peyton Barber. If Ronald Jones doesn't show out, the next man up is probably Andre Ellington. If a trade doesn't happen, or a running back becomes available, or one of the free agent running backs gets scooped up, because I believe Jay Ajayi is clear. He's been cleared to return to like practice and stuff since he tore his ACL. I think he's been cleared, but I don't know. I just wanted to throw that in there. But it makes sense to me. Chris Godwin is going to be, he's being highly sought after. He's being highly talked about this offseason. If I can get shares of him, I will. So far in my mock drafts, I haven't really been able to tie him down. And I'm not, depending on who's left and where he's being drafted, I'm not reaching for him. But if I can get him, I will. All right. So 19, at the 19th spot, I have Tyler Boyd. Tyler Boyd is another wide receiver who's been getting a lot of noise, hype noise, as far as coming into this fantasy season. And I think rightfully so. The Bengals have been looking for a number 2 wide receiver for a while. I thought that they had one when Marvin Jones was there, and then they shipped him out, or they didn't want to pay him. So it's been AJ Green and nobody else, because Tyler Eifert's been hurt. Joe Mixon is coming on, and he's showing off his pass catching skills, but there's still a lot of targets there in the Cincinnati Bengals offense where Tyler Boyd can be viable now. You saw it last year. He had 108 targets for 76 receptions and just over 1,000 yards, but he's the wide receiver too. He benefited from working well with AJ Green while he was healthy, and then he kind of took a hit when AJ Green went down, but he was still getting that. I believe he's still getting the volume. So Boyd showed why he can be a legit wide receiver option, even if he's the number 2. He had 7 touchdowns last year, which is pretty good. And then you have the offensive changes that are being made for the Rams. Not the Rams. I'm thinking Zach Taylor, because he's the new head coach from the Rams coming over to the Cincinnati Bengals. And, if you can get some of that Rams magic in the passing game for Andy Dalton to hit AJ Green and Tyler Boyd, he could see a bump in production as he could benefit from being targeted more as the number 2 option for the Bengals. I like Tyler Boyd, of course, because he's in my top 20, but I was able to pick him up last year off waivers, in one of my leagues, and he paid off pretty well. So he's definitely not hitting waivers this year. But Tyler Boyd is definitely a wide receiver to get your hands on between him, Godwin, and Calvin Ridley. Those three wide receivers in particular, I would like to target. I want shares of each one of these guys if I can get them on my fantasy team this year. And probably saying that if any one of my friends are listening, I probably ruined those chances. But it doesn't matter. If I can get at least one of them on one of my fantasy teams, I'm golden. All right, now coming in at the 20th spot, I have Kenny Golladay from the Detroit Lions. I was rather hype on him last year because he was a big body wide receiver. You had Golden Tate, who was more slot duty, and Marvin Jones was probably the only real opposition for him in the red zone because how he thrives there. But I like Kenny Golladay coming into this season. Golden Tate is gone. He's in NY, and per recent reports, he got slapped with a 4-game suspension. So that sucks for the Giants. But Kenny Golladay is going to be, he should see a bump in targets too. He's going to be the number one. I don't know what's going on with Marvin Jones. Reports were that the Lions were thinking about trading him mid-season. He's not happy with what's going on with the offensive scheme under Matt Patricia. I don't know what's going on over there as far as Marvin Jones is concerned, but if anything leads to Marvin Jones getting checked out of there, Kenny Golladay is going to soak up those targets. There's already a target share there with Golden Tate not being there. He had 118 targets last season, which was good for a rookie. 70 receptions, and he finished with just over 1,000 yards, 1,063, and 5 touchdowns. I believe that the Lions are going to try and run the ball. They haven't had a stable running back group in like forever, but when it comes to passing in the red zone, I think that's where you're going to be looking at. You have Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones, and that the new rookie tight end, T.J. Hawkinson. So Kenny Golladay is going to be leading the wide receivers for the Lions. I think he can actually finish higher in fantasy, but I'll keep him in my top 20 list, and it's good, and go from there. But I like Kenny Golladay this season. Matt Stafford should be looking his way pretty much a little bit more. I say he can get anywhere between the targets that he had last year, and I say his ceiling could be 130 targets. But that rounds up mine, because Jalen ain't here. But like I said, I'll get Jalen's list and I'll have it posted on Twitter at Fantasy's Phinest. But this will wrap it up for the early wide receiver rankings 11 through 20. We're going to finish up the rest of our rankings later on in further episodes. I think I should break up the monotony a little bit. I don't want to keep doing rankings. So we'll see if we can get some audience participation in our next episode. Maybe some questions, or try and answer some questions, or answer some fantasy questions from our followers and listeners. We'll see how that goes. That'll wrap it up for this episode. Thank you guys for listening. Hopefully we'll have Jalen back in our next couple episodes. Like I said, he's been taking care of some business, so just make sure you're straight. Hit him up on Twitter at ace_gametime215. Let him know you missed him for this episode, and we'll be back at you guys. Thanks for listening.